So I'm going to tie a little streamer pattern today. This fly is called the Anorexic. From time to time I get requests from followers and people who watch the channel to tie, either to do videos for flies that they're interested in, and even to do some local patterns. This is a local pattern from Northeast Indiana that was sent to me and requested that I tie some of these and for them, as well as to do a video. This apparently is a great panfish fly, at least for them up in that area. It's kind of fun when you get these flies from different areas that somebody came up with. And by the way, that's the name that they gave the fly. And I think it's simply because it is just so thin and there's not much to it. It's just a very, very skinny little baitfish pattern. But it's just fun getting these flies that, like I said, somebody else has come up with that it does very, very well, at least in that region. And I'm certain it would probably do well in other areas too. This allows me to do a video on this particular pattern, and then they can tie some more, or if they know of anybody in their area that could tie it, then they can tie it for them. Straightforward fly, tail, body, hackle, that's it. That's the Anorexic. I'll get started. I'm going to start the Anorexic with my hook and the vise. This is a Mustad 9672 with a size 6. You could use a little bit shorter shanked hook, like a 71 if you want. The idea is that it's a long shanked hook, so you could even go with say a 5X long if you wanted to. For thread, I'm using a UTC 210 Denier in black. It's a heavy thread, and I'll explain why in just a second. Let me start by debarbing the hook. I'll attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook and advance my thread down to just past the point of the hook. I'm going to tie in my tail. For the tail, it's just red Hackle barbs. You could use a marabou if you want. You could even put in, say, a tuft of rabbit if that's what you have. I'm going to use some Schlappen. I've got nice soft Schlappen here. If you don't have that, you could use, say, a Rooster saddle or something like that. You could use some of the fluffier barbs off of this if you want. I don't think it really matters that much. I like the softer barbs. So I'm going to isolate, I don't know, maybe about half an inch, 3/8 of an inch, worth of barbs here, or whatever you want. Doesn't have to be real thin or super thick. It's up to you. Tie this in about a shank length long. I'm going to advance my thread down to the end of the shank. Now, if these extend longer, I can go ahead and trim off the excess so that's within the body. Now, this fly is very, very sparse, but I do like to tie in a tapered body to it so that if it's a bait fish, it's going to have that kind of torpedo shape to it. I'm going to use thread mostly to make the underbody of this. That's why I went with a larger size thread. You don't have to do that. You could use even a 6/0. It's just going to take more wraps, more time to wrap it. I'm going to top this off with some floss. I'm using a Danville 4-strand Rayon in black. This is going to just go on top of all the thread wraps to smooth it off just a little bit more. You don't have to. If you don't have black floss, then you don't have to do this. I'm going to show you a way where it turns out pretty nice and smooth anyway. So I'm going to advance my thread forward, and this is just to collect all that material down to the hook shank, keeping this nice touching turn so it's nice and smooth. And I'm not going to go much further than an eye length behind the eye of the hook here. Now I'm going to start wrapping backwards. Now you'll notice that as I'm doing this, my thread, which is getting twisted here, I'm putting in a half clockwise turn every time I'm wrapping this thread around the hook. It's getting twisted more and more, so it's going in as a tighter cord, and that's fine. I'm only going to go down maybe about 90% the hook shank, maybe 85% of the hook shank, and then start coming back up. I'm going to keep going back and forth along the hook shank doing this until I get that tapered body I'm looking for. Each time I go down the hook shank, I will not go down as far as I did the previous time, and then I will go forward again. I'm going to keep doing that till I get the tapered shape I'm looking for, and then I'll smooth it off. That right in this area here, as I was putting in that couple layers back, some of that thread moved down forward, and that happens sometimes. It's no big deal. That's part of the reason I stayed behind, that far behind the eye of the hook. I do want to make certain that this area is where the hackle is going to go, so I don't want to crowd that too much. Now I've got the tapered body that I'm looking for, and you'll notice that as it's kind of interesting because as it's sitting right here, you'll notice that my bobbin is starting to spin. It's actually starting to unwind itself. And that's fine. That's what I want it to do. I do want to point that out, though, because as we're tying in the hackle in a little bit, whether the thread is flat or whether it's twisted can be a little bit of a factor. What I'm going to do is actually flatten the thread now. So if it hasn't unwound on you, you want to flatten that out, because now I'm going to put in a topping layer of thread, working my way backwards, covering all this up with the flat thread, and the flat thread will fill in the gaps in between the thread that was wrapped on there that had a more rounded, corded look to it. The flat thread will kind of fill that in, smooth that off. And that's why you really don't have to do the floss if you don't want to. I think it just adds a little bit more to it. But as you can see, by flattening the thread here, I am getting a pretty nice smooth body as it is. And you can flatten the thread on the 6/0 Danville as well if that's what you're using to do this fly. I get down here to the end. I just want to make certain that my thread is spreading out a little bit, so I'm going to twist this up just a little. I don't want it to spread out and get a whole lot of loose fibers all over the place. Thread tension is important. I just eased up the tension on my thread there, and you can see things kind of shifted a little bit. Keeping my thread a little bit behind the eye of the hook, I should say. Now I'm going to wrap in the floss. This is a pretty quick little fly to tie. It's actually a lot quicker to just go ahead and tie these than it is in the video, because I have to slow down and explain the different steps and so on and so forth. Now, at this stage, actually, if you wanted to, you could switch out to a smaller diameter thread because the larger diameter has served its purpose. I'm still going to keep with it. There's one other thing I'm going to do here. Because of the fact this is more of a panfish fly than anything else, at least that's what it's used to fish for here in Indiana, the panfish and their little sandpapery teeth are going to shred this thread and floss up real quick. So there's a couple things you could do. If you wanted to, you could put some UV resin on this, something like that. You could put some light coat of epoxy or hard as hull or something like that, even some Sally Hansen's or something hard as nails. I'm just going to put a layer of head cement, and I use Fly Tight head cement. It's an alcohol-based head cement that is pretty thin. It will soak right down into those thread wraps. This is going to help reinforce them a little bit so that little teeth aren't going to shred this as quickly. Let's put it that way. The other thing is I don't have to wait for that to dry. If you use a UV material, it'll cure very quick. An epoxy would take a little bit longer, so you batch some of these up. But with that head cement, I can just let it go. It's going to dry while I put the collar on, because that's the only thing that's left. And this is just a black collar. I'm using just a small little rooster neck that I've got here. I like the length of the barbs on these. They'll end up generally about the same distances from the head area back to the point of the hook. And I'm only going to put 2, maybe 3 wraps at most on this. I don't want much more. Because I do want to keep this nice and thin. After all, it is called the Anorexic. Notice that I am about an eye length behind the eye of the hook here, and that's fine because I want this tied in and I want it to be more of a perpendicular collar. Kind of like you would tie a soft hackle. I don't really want this to be swept back. I want this to stand out a little bit more. So I'll get a few wraps of thread to make the head there. Careful, because this is a large thread. You can very quickly make all of that too big. I'm going to moisten my fingers a little bit and sweep this back just so that I can easily get my thread in here. And I had mentioned before whether the thread is flat or whether it's twisted can make a difference at different stages. This is one of them. You leave that flat, which normally I would here in that little space, you're going to have a difficult time getting your head nice and keeping it nice and small up in this area. So I'm actually putting in a clockwise twist. And then when I'm doing my whip finish here, I don't have to worry about it flattening out and broadening out. It doesn't have to look perfect, but I don't want that to get too big. Cut away my thread, and now as you can see, I have a very, very thin bodied streamer with a nice broad hackle to it that stands out really nice. It's not all tied in and swept back. So there is the anorexic. I cannot attest to how well this fishes because I haven't fished any yet. As I said, this was given to me not long ago to tie up. I tied a few of them, sent them up to the person who requested it, and they liked it. They said, "That's it." I said, "Okay." So that is the anorexic. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.